Imagine burying your body in a dark hole the size of a manhole cover, knowing that someone inside is waiting to kill you. This is not a metaphor. This is not cinematic exaggeration. This is how the work of a tunnel rat in the Vietnam War began. The jungle seemed peaceful for a few seconds. The wind rustled the leaves, insects sang, and the platoon advanced attentively. Then, out of nowhere, shots came from the ground. Not from the trees, not from the hills, from the ground. And when silence returned, only a small hole in the earth remained. The question wasn't whether anyone would go down. The question was, who would have enough courage to enter? Michael Donnelly was 20 years old, thin, short, his shoulders too narrow for the uniform he wore. The son of a World War II veteran, he grew up hearing stories about men who faced the impossible to protect their comrades. He never imagined that his own war would be fought on his knees, crawling in the dark. When the lieutenant said he needed a tunnel rat, no one moved for a few seconds. The silence was heavy. It wasn't cowardice, it was awareness. Everyone knew what that meant. Michael took a step forward, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he understood something simple. If no one came down, someone up there could die. He removed his vest to fit through the opening. He took off his helmet. He was left only with a .45 caliber pistol, a flashlight taped to his shoulder, and a knife. Before kneeling, he ran his hand over the American flag sewn onto his shoulder, not as a theatrical gesture, but as a reminder. Up there were his friends. Up there were men who trusted him, and somewhere far away was his family, believing he would return in one piece. The hole swallowed the daylight quickly. A few centimeters below the surface, the air was already different. Heavy, damp, almost solid. Michael had to hold his breath for a few seconds to control the initial panic. The tunnel was too narrow to turn his body. If something came from the front, there would be no room to run. He advanced centimeter by centimeter. Each movement made the earth scrape against his shoulders. Every noise seemed too loud. And then the first doubt arose, one that no training had taught him to resolve. What if the flashlight fails? What if someone is standing there, waiting for the right moment? The Viet Cong tunnels were an underground city. Some had multiple levels, hidden rooms, weapons depots, and secret exits miles away. They weren't makeshift holes. They were systems designed to transform the very ground into a weapon, traps with grenades attached to almost invisible wires, trapdoors leading to sharpened stakes, snakes deliberately left in dark pockets. Michael knew these stories. He had heard accounts from soldiers who didn't return, and yet he continued advancing. The flashlight illuminated something strange ahead. A thin wire crisscrossed the tunnel at chest height. He stopped inches from activating it. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it was vibrating against the earthen walls. With extreme care, he used the knife to cut the makeshift mechanism. A grenade fell to the ground with a dry thud. For a second, he wondered if this was just the first test, if the enemy was further ahead, watching, waiting for fear to do the work alone. The mind begins to create enemies when darkness is total. And at that moment, the greatest adversary wasn't a man with a gun. It was fear itself. He advanced a few more meters and found marks on the wall, small scratches, almost invisible. Were they signs left by other soldiers, or codes from the Viet Cong themselves? Each detail generated a new question. Each turn brought the possibility of a confrontation just centimeters away. What if he was being followed? What if there was a lower level he hadn't noticed? The tunnel seemed to close in even more, as if the earth itself wanted to push him back. Up above, the platoon waited in silence. They knew that while Michael was down there, time ran differently. Each minute felt like an hour, and the question no one asked aloud was simple. Would he come back? Those men depended on what he discovered. A map, a strategic exit, any information that could prevent a future ambush. A tunnel rat's job wasn't just to survive, it was to protect lives that might never know exactly what happened in that underground tunnel. Michael felt the air grow even thinner. For a moment, he thought of retreating. He thought of the sun, the light, the normal noise of the world above. But then he remembered why he had taken that step forward. He remembered that serving meant facing what others could not. Patriotism, there was not just talk. It was responsibility. It was the silent decision to continue when his body begged him to stop. He advanced to a small open chamber in the tunnel. The space was slightly larger. There was an ammunition box and a folded piece of paper, a rudimentary map. This could change the dynamics of combat in that region. But if there was one room there, how many others were there? And what if someone was watching from the other side of the darkness, waiting for him to relax for a second? The flashlight blinked. Darkness swallowed everything for an instant, and in that dark second, a question flashed through his mind like a gunshot. Was he really alone down there? The flashlight came back on with a weak, unstable glow, as if it too were afraid. Michael gripped the gun tightly, trying to hear any sound other than his own heart. In absolute darkness, a few seconds are enough for the mind to create invisible threats. It's like waking up in the middle of the night, hearing a noise in the house, and feeling your whole body become alert even before you understand what happened. Now imagine that sensation multiplied, knowing that the danger is real and armed. He took a deep breath and moved a little further into that small chamber. The folded paper he had found wasn't just a draft. It was part of a larger tunnel scheme, with connections leading to other villages. It explained how the enemy appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. To many, that war seemed confusing, distant, difficult to understand. But down there, the logic was simple. If those tunnels remained intact, more ambushes would occur. More American soldiers would be surprised. Michael's mission wasn't just to explore, it was to cut the problem off at the root. He tucked the map into his uniform and continued on. The tunnel descended at a slight incline. The air grew even heavier. Sweat streamed from his eyes and mingled with the earth. Every movement demanded absolute control. One wrong decision could be his last. Many ex-military personnel who have heard accounts like this know exactly what it means to rely solely on their own training. It's like driving on a dark road in heavy rain, when visibility is almost zero. You don't stop in the middle of the road. You keep going because others depend on you reaching their destination. A dry sound echoed ahead. It wasn't his imagination. Someone was there. Michael instinctively turned off his flashlight. The darkness was total again. The silence became almost physical. He could hear his own breath hitting the walls. He thought of his house in Texas, his father waking up early for work, the American flag flying in front of the school where he studied. He wasn't there for adventure. He was there because he believed that protecting his comrades was a duty. For those who lived through that time, the feeling was clear. Abandoning the mission meant abandoning the man beside you. The noise returned. Closer. A slight rustling of earth. Michael suddenly turned his flashlight back on. The beam of light cut through the tunnel and revealed a swift movement. There was no time for hesitation. Two muffled shots echoed. The confined space amplified the sound like an explosion inside his head. Then, silence. He moved forward slowly and saw the body of the fallen enemy combatant a few meters away. Two young men on opposite sides of the war, meeting inches apart. There was no talking in that moment. There was survival. Michael stood still for a few seconds, feeling the weight of what had happened. He didn't celebrate. He thought about the men up there. He thought that if he had hesitated, perhaps the next ambush would have cost American lives. That was the difference between theory and reality. The underground war wasn't about territory. It was about seconds of decision. Further on, he found another fork in the road. To the left, the tunnel seemed narrower. To the right, a slightly wider corridor indicated possible frequent use. He chose the right. Each choice was a gamble. At home, everyday decisions rarely involved life-threatening risks. Choosing a job, moving to another city, taking on a responsibility. In the tunnel, each decision could determine who would see the sunrise. Suddenly, he felt something touch his arm. He turned quickly, almost shooting again. It was just a root hanging from the ceiling. His body reacted before reason. That's how fear works. It doesn't ask permission. It takes control. Many veterans report that even years later, unexpected sounds still trigger this reflex. The tunnel doesn't end when you return to the surface. It accompanies the memory. Michael found another small room. There was ammunition, supplies, and clear signs that the location was frequently used. This confirmed that the system was active. He knew he needed to return with the information. The map he carried and confirmation of that depot would allow American engineers to destroy strategic points and reduce surprise attacks. The silent work of a tunnel rat could save dozens of lives. As he began his return journey, he heard something that sent shivers down his spine. Footsteps. Not ahead, behind him. The question arose immediately and inevitably. Had someone entered after him? The tunnel was now not only unfamiliar, it was a place where he could be hunted. He turned off his flashlight again, trying to control his breathing. The sound became clearer, earth moving, slowly, deliberately. He realized something few understand until they experience it. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is deciding to act even when fear is present. Up there, men were waiting for him. Men who had families, stories, dreams. He couldn't fail. He adjusted the grip of his pistol and prepared for what was to come, knowing that the next few seconds could define not only his life, but the fate of the entire platoon. The sound behind him wasn't his imagination. It was rhythmic, controlled. Someone was moving cautiously, knowing that space better than he did. Michael leaned against the earthen wall and tried to slow his breathing. The tunnel seemed narrower now, the air heavier. He realized something few understand outside of that context. Underground, time is distorted. 5 seconds seem like minutes. A minute seems like an eternity. He needed to decide. Advance or wait. Attack or remain invisible. The doubt was as dangerous as any trap. The tunnels in Vietnam were not merely makeshift corridors. They were structures planned over years. Some had 3 different levels. The first served as a quick passage. The second as a storage and shelter area. The third was the deepest, protected against bombs and chemical attacks. Many had ventilation systems almost invisible on the surface, camouflaged like anthills. How do you fight an enemy that transforms the very ground into a fortress? How do you confront a labyrinth that doesn't appear on official maps? Michael recalled the rapid training he received before his first mission as tunnel rat. There was no detailed manual. There were survivor accounts. There were basic instructions. Keep your weapon close to your body. Test the ground before putting your weight on it. Never trust a space that seems too wide. The rest was instinct. He realized that the real battlefield there wasn't physical. It was mental. Whoever controlled their fear would have the advantage. But to what extent can someone control their fear when they're buried alive? The noise behind him grew closer. Michael turned off his flashlight again. The darkness was total. He closed his eyes, even knowing it made no difference. He focused on the sound, a faint dragging, then silence. Perhaps the other soldier was doing exactly the same, waiting for him to reveal his position. 2 men, 2 opposing sides, trapped in the same tiny space, breathing the same heavy air. What goes through someone's mind at that moment? Hatred, fear, survival. He made an unexpected decision. Instead of waiting, he quickly moved forward a few inches and sharply turned on his flashlight again. The beam of light cut through the tunnel, revealing an empty bend. The sound had stopped. No bodies, no movement, just the feeling that he wasn't alone. The tunnel wasn't just a physical space, it was a psychological weapon. How many soldiers had lost their sanity down there before even encountering the enemy? Michael noticed recent marks on the ground, light footprints in the loose earth. Someone had passed by there minutes before. He followed the trail to a small opening to the side. The space was so narrow that he had to strain his shoulder to get in. The air was almost unbreathable. There he found something that would change the perception of the mission. A small, makeshift outpost with a radio, ammunition, and active communication signals. This was not just a hiding place. It was a coordination center. If that structure remained operational, more American patrols would be surprised. He understood at that moment that the role of a tunnel rat went beyond exploration. They were the eyes and ears of the platoon in invisible territory. Each discovery prevented future ambushes. Each tunnel destroyed reduced the enemy's strategic advantage. But who recognized this work? Who saw what happened underground? The war on the surface was filmed, photographed, discussed. The war below ground was silent, almost secret. How many stories were never told? Suddenly, a snap ahead interrupted his thoughts. It wasn't human footsteps, it was the sound of a mechanism being activated. He froze. A trap. A taut wire he hadn't noticed. The reaction needed to be immediate. With slow movements, he located the almost invisible wire at knee height. An improvised grenade was attached to the side wall. He gripped the mechanism with one hand, and with the other carefully cut the wire. Sweat dripped from his fingers. If his hand trembled, the tunnel would become his tomb. He managed to deactivate the trap, but the message was clear. The enemy knew that Americans were descending there. They knew how to prepare the space to receive them. Underground warfare was a contest of intelligence and psychological resilience. Military strength alone was not enough. Adaptation was necessary. And American soldiers were learning quickly. Specialized teams were created, ventilation techniques tested, new detection methods developed. The inevitable question that arises is, how far is someone willing to go to protect their comrades? Michael began his return journey with the map and confirmation of the communication post. He knew that information would allow him to neutralize critical points in the network. But the sound behind him returned, now closer than before. It wasn't his imagination, it was a real presence. He slowly turned his body within the tight confines of the tunnel. The flashlight illuminated two eyes reflecting light in the darkness. There were no words, only the awareness that this was the decisive moment. The gunshot echoed, muffled once more. The light flickered, the tunnel returned to its heavy silence. Michael remained motionless, trying to understand if the danger had passed. He knew that even if he survived, something inside him would change forever. The underground war didn't leave visible marks like open battles. It left internal scars. And the final question wasn't whether he would get out of there. The question was, when he did get out, would he be able to leave the tunnel behind? When Michael finally saw a real beam of natural light ahead, his eyes took a few seconds to accept that it wasn't his imagination. The tunnel seemed endless, but there was the exit. He emerged from the earth like someone returning to the surface after holding their breath for too long. His companion's hands pulled him out. The jungle air, heavy and humid, still seemed pure compared to the underground. No one shouted. No one made a speech, just steady stares and a silent squeeze on the shoulder. Among American soldiers, respect is often shown without words. The map he brought confirmed something the commanders already suspected. That region was connected to a larger network of tunnels, with strategic points that allowed for quick attacks and immediate disappearance. It is estimated that throughout the war, hundreds of kilometers of tunnels were built in different provinces. Some systems, like those in the Viet Cong region, included makeshift hospitals, underground kitchens, and assembly areas. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was war infrastructure. How do you confront an enemy that transforms the very land into an invisible fortress? The American response was not to retreat. It was to adapt. Specialized units began to be trained to deal with underground combat. Soldiers began to study techniques for disabling traps, recognizing camouflaged ventilation, and moving silently in confined spaces. It wasn't the kind of battle that made headlines, but it was decisive. Statistics show that many ambushes were avoided thanks to the information brought by tunnel rats. Each mapped tunnel reduced the element of surprise. Each discovered depot diminished the enemy's capacity to attack. How many lives were saved by men who descended alone in the dark? Michael sat for a few minutes after the mission, still covered in dirt. His body was there, but his mind still seemed trapped underground. He realized something that many veterans recount years later. The danger doesn't end when the mission is over. The body emerges from the tunnel before the mind. The noise of the jungle seemed too loud. A breaking branch made his heart race. The reflex to reach for his weapon became automatic. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it, but those who have served understand. War creates a constant state of alert. A few days later, American engineers used the collected information to neutralize strategic entrances and destroy critical areas of the system. This was not just a tactical victory. It was a clear message. American adaptability would not be underestimated. Throughout the war, thousands of soldiers participated in operations related to the identification and neutralization of tunnels. Although the exact number of tunnel rats has never been officially consolidated, it is estimated that hundreds served directly in underground missions, often at extreme risk and with limited reconnaissance. Why do so few know these stories? American culture has always valued practical courage, the kind manifested in daily duty. It's not just the image of the soldier in the open field. It's also the man who accepts the most difficult task because he knows someone needs to do it. Michael was no different from so many young men of his time. He had dreams, a family, plans for the future. Yet in that context, the priority was protecting his comrades. This sense of collective responsibility is what sustained many platoons in extreme situations. When we talk about patriotism, we often think of symbols, but on the battlefield, patriotism is action. In one of the letters he wrote home, Michael didn't describe the mission in detail. He only said that he was doing what needed to be done to keep his friends safe. This simple sentence sums up much of what that generation of soldiers was like. Men who faced a different kind of war, complex, often misunderstood by the public. The Vietnam War wasn't simple, it wasn't linear, but for those who were there, the daily mission was clear: protect the man next to you. There are reports of tunnel rats who went through more than 20 descents during their service. Some suffered serious injuries, others carried psychological consequences that lasted for decades. Combat in confined spaces increases the risk of post-traumatic stress, according to studies conducted years later. Constant exposure to claustrophobic environments coupled with the invisible threat creates deep scars. Yet many of these men rarely spoke about what they did. They weren't seeking public recognition. They were seeking to fulfill their duty. Michael went down into other tunnels in the following months. Each mission was different. None was easier. But something changed after that first experience. He learned that fear can be managed, not eliminated, but controlled. He learned to identify patterns in the ground, to perceive small changes in the air that indicated artificial ventilation, to recognize abnormal silence. The underground ceased to be just terror. It became an environment that demanded extreme mental discipline. How many civilians can imagine what it means to fight lying down, crawling, without knowing what lies 2 meters away? By the end of their time in that region, the number of ambushes had decreased considerably. This was no coincidence. It was the result of intelligence, adaptation, and individual courage. The story of the tunnel rats is often overshadowed by major battles and political decisions, but at the tactical level, the impact was real. Soldiers who descended alone helped reduce losses and weaken underground structures that supported enemy operations. Years later, back in the United States, Michael visited a school where he was invited to speak about his experience. He didn't describe confrontations. He didn't mention shootings. He only said that courage is continuing when the task seems impossible. He said that serving means taking on responsibilities that others may never see. Many young people in the audience didn't fully understand what that meant, but veterans present knew. They knew that sometimes the greatest test of strength doesn't happen in broad daylight, but in the silence of the underground. And perhaps the most unexpected question is this: if you were standing before that dark hole, knowing that your decision could save lives, what would you do? Months passed, but the sound of the tunnel never completely disappeared from Michael's mind. Even when he was back at base, lying in a simple barracks, he only had to close his eyes to feel the weight of the earth on his shoulders again. The absolute silence, breath echoing off the narrow walls. Many imagine that the most difficult moment of war is direct confrontation. But for the tunnel rats, the most difficult moment came afterward, when the mind tried to reorganize what it had experienced. He kept going down, not because he wanted to prove something, but because it was necessary. Each new mission seemed to repeat the same ritual: remove the heavy equipment, check the pistol, test the flashlight, take a deep breath, and disappear underground. His comrades always watched with the same mixture of respect and concern. They knew he was taking a risk that few would accept. In one of these operations, the team found an underground complex even larger than the previous one. There were makeshift beds, medical supplies, even a small area used as a meeting room. This showed that the conflict was not improvised. It was organized, persistent. At one point, as he made his way down a particularly narrow corridor, Michael sensed something different in the air. It wasn't just the smell of damp earth. There was a faint smoke. He followed slowly until he spotted a small, still warm, underground kitchen. The enemy had left minutes before. The proximity made everything more tense. He knew someone might be waiting around the next corner. The question wasn't if there would be danger, but when it would arise. On another mission, one of the soldiers waiting on the surface heard a muffled explosion coming from the tunnel. The silence that followed was heavy. For seconds that seemed endless. Everyone imagined the worst. Then Michael's voice echoed weakly down the corridor, asking for rope and support. He had partially triggered a trap, but managed to avoid full impact. He emerged with minor injuries, but alive. This episode reinforced something many veterans know. Survival doesn't depend solely on strength. It depends on constant concentration and a small margin of luck. Throughout the war, it is estimated that thousands of tunnel entrances were destroyed or neutralized thanks to underground reconnaissance work. Each recovered map, each identified depot, altered the tactical balance of the region. Although the number of tunnel rats was small compared to the total number of soldiers sent to Vietnam, their impact was disproportionately large. They operated where heavy technology couldn't reach, where vehicles and bombing couldn't solve the problem. They operated in the most intimate dimension of combat. Michael began to notice internal changes. Sudden sounds made his body react before his mind could process them. Enclosed spaces caused immediate discomfort. At the same time, he developed an unusual mental resilience. He learned to control his breathing in extreme situations. He learned to think under intense pressure. This discipline would accompany him far beyond the war. Many veterans report that the skills acquired in combat, despite the suffering, shaped their ability to face difficulties in civilian life. In a final letter sent before returning to the United States, he wrote that the war had taught him something simple, yet profound. No one wins alone. Every descent into the tunnel only made sense because there were men waiting on the surface. Every risk taken was part of a collective commitment. This spirit of mutual responsibility was one of the strongest hallmarks of that generation of American soldiers. When he finally boarded the plane to go home, Michael carried more than just memories. He carried experiences that few could fully comprehend. Upon landing on American soil, the contrast was stark. Open streets, expansive skies, spaces without immediate threat. Yet, for the first few months, he avoided elevators and very enclosed spaces. His body took time to understand that it was no longer at war. Years later, at veterans' reunions, he met other men who had gone underground. Some rarely spoke about it. Others shared details only among those who truly understood. The bond created in those experiences was difficult to explain to those who had never faced extreme danger side by side. It was a bond built on silence and absolute trust. The story of the tunnel rats isn't just about combat. It's about human adaptation in extreme conditions. It's about young men who accepted unseen tasks to protect their comrades. It's about the American capacity to face complex challenges with practical courage and a sense of duty. Michael never sought public recognition. He knew that many didn't even understand the scale of that underground war, but he was certain that on each descent he did what needed to be done. And perhaps the greatest test of strength lies not in the moment of firing or in the destruction of a tunnel. Perhaps it lies in the repeated decision to continue serving, even when fear is constant. The war ends in the official records, but its lessons remain. For Michael, the clearest lesson was this: courage is not an isolated act. It is a choice renewed every day, especially when no one is watching. Time passed. The war ended in the newspapers, in political decisions, in television broadcasts. But for many men, it didn't end on the same date. For Michael, the tunnel continued to exist in unexpected moments, not in physical form, but in memory. Sometimes a dark corridor or the muffled sound of a distant engine was enough to make his heart race, as if he were still under the earth of Vietnam. And that's where the story takes on a contrast that few imagine. Years after returning to the United States, Michael was invited to participate in a ceremony honoring veterans. There were flags, speeches, proud families. Children held small American symbols in their hands. As he listened to the applause, he wondered something he had never verbalized. Was it worth descending into the underground hell so many times? Was it worth carrying that invisible weight for decades? The answer didn't come in the form of glory. It came in the form of memories. He remembered the faces of the men who waited on the surface. He remembered each time he returned with information that prevented ambushes. He remembered the comrades who returned home because someone decided to face the unknown. The emotional contrast was stark. The war brought pain, fear, and deep scars. But it also revealed something essential about character, responsibility, and commitment. There's a truth that's rarely discussed openly. Courage isn't an isolated moment on the battlefield. Courage is what happens afterward. It's building a life, even while carrying difficult memories. It's transforming discipline into contribution. Many veterans have returned and served their communities as firefighters, teachers, police officers, and local leaders. The underground experience taught them something that can't be learned from books. When responsibility is real, you don't wait for someone else to solve it. You act. Michael spent years avoiding talking about the tunnels, not out of shame, but because he believed no one would fully understand. Until one day, a young student approached him after a lecture and asked, "How does someone find the strength to go into a place like that?" The question hung in the air. He thought for a few seconds and replied simply, "You don't go in because you're fearless. You go in because someone needs you to." This is the turning point that transforms this story into something bigger than a war tale. We all face tunnels at some point. It may not be a dirt corridor under the jungle. It could be a financial crisis, a family problem, a difficult decision that needs to be made. The fear is real. The darkness is real. The doubt is real. The question is always the same. Will you retreat, or will you advance a few inches, even trembling? Michael's generation faced complex challenges during a turbulent period in American history. Many returned to a divided country. They were not always received with understanding. Yet they continued to contribute, work, raise families, and participate in civic life. This is a part of history that deserves to be remembered with respect. Patriotism is not just a word. It is an ongoing commitment to values, even when reality is difficult. Today, when we look back, it's easy to simplify. It's easy to turn everything into statistics or debates. But behind every number were real people. There were individual decisions made in seconds that impacted lives for decades. The tunnel rat's work was invisible to many. There were no cameras underground. There were no daily headlines detailing every descent. There were just men quietly doing their duty. And here is the final contrast. The tunnel seemed like the darkest place in the world, but it was there that many discovered their own strength. The space that seemed suffocating revealed resilience. The silence that seemed terrifying revealed clarity of purpose. Michael realized years later that the experience defined him not only by fear, but by his ability to act despite it. Now the question shifts to you. When life presents a challenge that seems small on the outside, but gigantic on the inside, will you remember this story? Will you remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but a conscious decision? Will you remember that protecting, serving, and acting are daily choices? If this story made you reflect, brought back memories, or sparked respect for men and women who faced extreme situations, don't let this conversation stop here. Subscribe to the channel to follow more profound and true stories. Like this video so that more people can learn about accounts that are often forgotten. and comment below. Do you have a personal experience of overcoming adversity? Or do you know someone who served and deserves to be remembered? Your participation keeps these stories alive.